Good evening. If you'd like to turn in your Bibles to 2 Chronicles chapter 34. 2 Chronicles chapter 34. This is the first Sunday night of the year where you've wondered to yourself, is he going to go Old Testament or New Testament tonight? If you're visiting with us or if you've not been following along, we started a Bible reading plan as a church family way back in January. And if you have kept along with that, you have now entered New Testament days, which is call for great rejoicing, I'm sure, as we get to the stories we're probably a little more familiar with. And I know the New Testament God and the Old Testament God is the same God, but sometimes it feels a little different, and maybe the focus of the story seems a little different. And the answer to the question tonight is both. We're going to go Old Testament and New Testament tonight and kind of hopefully tie them together to some degree. And as I mentioned last week, if somewhere along the way you fell off of the wagon of Bible reading and you'd like to jump back on, I think we were supposed to have started Matthew yesterday, if I remember right. I don't know what happened on my plan, but for some reason my plan showed Matthew as today. So I'm a day behind or right on with my plan, but anyhow, you can jump into Matthew now and read the New Testament between now and the end of the year, or just read as far as you get, and you will be better off than you would have if you didn't read as far as you get. So we're going to look a little bit at both tonight. The kings in Old Testament days are kind of a mixed bag. Probably a little more bad than good, especially once we get into the division of the kingdom. We have a lot more bad than good. And God warned them this would happen. God warned them all the way back when they had judges and decided they wanted kings because everybody else had kings, so we should have kings. And God said, well, here's what your kings are going to do. They're going to take your stuff, and you're not going to have anything of your own anymore, and they're going to lead you into trouble. And sure enough, they do all of those things. And so as the kingdom is together, you start off with the three that probably most of us know, of Saul and David and Solomon, that are each reigning for roughly 40 years. And then the kingdom splits, and then there's names that are kind of familiar when you hear them, but you've probably forgotten them somewhere along the way. And as we get close to the end of that time period, we run into a guy named Josiah. Now, the interesting thing about Josiah is he becomes king as an 8-year-old. I don't know what you were doing when you were 8 years old, but I wasn't doing anything remotely like that. I was a third grader when I was 8 years old, and I was trying to learn about grammar and math and all of that kind of stuff. I was still a year away from my first year of Little League Baseball, even at that point. And here is Josiah becoming king. It's just a very different world than the world in which we live. So Josiah, the king, we learn about in 2 Chronicles, starting in chapter 34, verse 1. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. So Josiah is going to be king from the point he is 8. And my assumption, by the way, I don't know if you read this differently than I do, I don't think they were giving an 8-year-old the nuclear codes, or whatever their version of that was back then. I'm sure there are a lot of advisors and a lot of people who are really doing the hard things as Josiah is eating ice cream. You know, I don't think there's a lot of real rule going on, but we're going to see Josiah kind of grow into that. So at 8, he becomes king. He reigns 31 years, so until he's roughly 39, he's going to be the king. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And if you have followed through the reading, or if you've just read this somewhere along the way before, this is kind of how the kings are described as you get to them. They're either guys who do evil in the sight of the Lord or in the eyes of the Lord, or kings who do right in the eyes of the Lord. And spoiler alert, there are a whole lot more people that do evil in the sight of the Lord than good. So it's interesting to me that when you come to this child king, that he is one who does right in the eyes of the Lord. And I would imagine whatever that looks like for an 8-year-old early on, and then he grows into the adult version of that, we're going to see here in a minute. And he walked in the ways of David his father, and he did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. So as we see Josiah described, I think we're going to see several things about him. But first of all, he did what is right in the eyes of the Lord. And that's the baseline for all of these kings. And for us, honestly, if you're to break everything we do down to its core, I think we could be described the same way. We're either people who do what is right in the eyes of the Lord, or people who do what is evil in the eyes of the Lord. And immediately you see the struggle between the time of the kings and the time of us here today in 2025 in Ada, America. It's not the same as how our world looks at things, is it? Because they don't want to say everything is just right or wrong. It's your point of view. Or as I hear way too often, and the phrase drives me crazy, speak your truth. I don't even know what that means, but I hear it weekly at least, of whatever it is you deem to be true is the thing you should shout from the mountaintops, and this is who you are. But when we see the kings described, it's not that these guys are speaking their truth or doing what's right for them. It's either they are doing what is right in the eyes of God, or they're doing what is, and notice, not even wrong in the eyes of God, evil in the eyes of the Lord. So Josiah does what's right. And there's an 8-year-old version of what's right, and that's good. And in a lot of ways, probably a lot more pure than what some of us adults do. And then there becomes an adult version of what's right, which we're going to see Josiah grow into. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was yet a boy, so 8th year of his reign, you were told there would be no math tonight, but if he became king at 8, he's in year 8 now, he is roughly 16. At 16 years old, and if you have ever been 16 or are currently 16, and you think, well, it really just doesn't matter all that much, here is Josiah at the beginning of changing everything, at least for a period of time. At least for the things that he can do to draw these people closer to God, the things that are within his control. While he was yet a boy, he began to seek the God of David, his father. So something is different about Josiah. He's described as having done what's right in the eyes of God, but now he's not just doing what's right, he is seeking after God. And I think for all of us, there are things in life where there are maybe multiple options that seem like they're okay, and yet there is probably one that is the godly direction we ought to go. This is what Josiah is seeking after. So he began to seek after the God of David, his father, and in the 12th year, so 4 years later, and again, if we're doing math, roughly age 20, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherim, and the carved and the metal images. And what we would read about several of these kings before is even when you ran into one that was described as doing what's right in the eyes of the Lord, there was a little footnote there in parentheses or just kind of an afterstatement of, but they didn't get rid of the high places. And these high places were places that were associated with idol worship. And so and again, I think this is the way we tend to see a lot of things in our world happen nowadays, which is there is the appearance of doing what is good, and then are you willing to really follow through all the way with that? Or are you just content with people feeling like what you're doing is good and you're really not quite all the way there? Josiah is all in. So at age 20, he is taking all these high places down, getting rid of the metal images, and then it says they chop down the altars of the Baals in his presence. So Josiah, being kingly, has got guys who are going to do the chopping. They're all chopping altars down, taking things to the next step of we're going to undo this to the point that you can't use these things anymore. And that's another step you have to go to, isn't it? It's one thing to try to move away from something. It's another thing to do away with it entirely and to make sure you can't have anything to do with it. I remember, a little younger than Josiah, at age 4 or 5, I had a Schwinn Stingray bicycle. Coolest thing in the world. Had a bell on it, had the little tassels that came off the handlebars, and the giant banana seat. And I would ride around my neighborhood on the Schwinn Stingray, just loving life. And then there was the day that it was time to take the training wheels off. And the security was gone, and yet it's a step you have to take. And at first there's a little bit of hesitance because you don't want to fall, and yet I've got to do this. And once they're off, they're off. You're moving in a different direction now. So Josiah is going around and he's just doing away with these altars, getting rid of them. They're chopping down the altars of Baal in his presence, and he cut down the incense altars that stood above them, and he broke in pieces the Asherim and the carved and metal images. He made dust of them. He is really, really going after this to make sure this is nothing you can reassemble, this is nothing you can rebuild, we're just going to be done with this. He made dust of them and scattered it over the graves of those who sacrificed to them. So not only is he taking all of this stuff down so they can't use it anymore, he's saying, these people who did this is what I think of what they did too. And he just puts all the dust out on their graves. He also burned the bones of the priests on their altars. So the way this is understood is Josiah goes into where the bones of the priests are, takes them out, burns them on these altars down to dust also, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. Josiah was going to take everything in a very different direction. And in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, in the ruins all around, he broke down the altars. So he didn't just stop where he was. He went into all these surrounding areas, broke down all their altars, and beat the Asherim and the images into powder and cut down all the incense altars throughout all the land of Israel. Then he returned to Jerusalem. So Josiah did what is right, and then he did what the other kings were unwilling to do, which is he got rid of idolatry. And he didn't just get rid of the idols that were close by and easy to get to, and he didn't just put them in a storage closet somewhere for someone to pull out later. He demolished it all. He burned it to dust. He sprinkled the dust on graves. He was done with it. He went to other towns and did the same. He wanted to make absolutely sure that idol worship was done. Continuing on. Now in the 18th year of his reign, so roughly age 26, when he had cleansed the land and the house, he sent Shaphan the son of Azaliah and Maaseiah the governor of the city and Joah the son of Joahaz the recorder to repair the house of the Lord his God. So he sends people out to begin to repair the temple because the temple had taken on too much of all of this other stuff, and he's trying to make it right. So step by step, and by the way, if you ever hear about Josiah's reforms in a book somewhere, this is what they're talking about. Josiah sees all of these things that are wrong with what they're doing, and he tries his best to fix them and move them back in the godly direction. And all of this by age 26. It's pretty amazing to me that here is the courage that you have been waiting for from all of these kings who have preceded, and now this young guy comes along and he begins to do all of it. In chapter 34 and verse 14, it says, while they were bringing out the money, they're going in and cleaning out the temple, getting all the stuff out of it. When they're bringing out the money that had been brought to the house of the Lord, Hilkiah the priest found the book of the law of the Lord given through Moses. So, as is the tendency, all of the rules, all the things they're supposed to be doing, they have just kind of set aside somewhere, covered it with other things in the temple, to the point that people have forgotten about it, and they find it, and they bring this law book out. In verse 18, it says that Shaphan the secretary told the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book, and Shaphan read it before the king. And this is kind of an image that should bring to mind of this happens several times throughout the Old Testament where people who have forgotten the law are reminded of it and someone reads it. You remember back when Uzzah was struck down when he touched the ark. And David was upset and couldn't figure out what was going on. And he thought this was just wrong. And then someone read to him what they should have been doing. That the Levites were supposed to be the ones carrying this ark in the first place. It should have never been on a cart to fall off of. And then David realized it was us. We're the ones that messed up. Or as we talked about a few weeks back, coming out of exile, where Ezra gets by the water gate there, and from morning till night, they gather around to hear the law that they've all forgotten, and they have not heard. So now they find this law, and they begin to read it to the king. And when the king heard the words of the law, he tore his clothes, because he realized, we haven't been doing these things. And this, by the way, the king who has probably done more right in these 18 years than most of the kings who have preceded him. And yet he looks and hears this law and realizes, we're not living up to this. And so he wants to find out what's going on from this. And he wants to change everything that's going on within their world because of the law that he's now heard. And he hears from a prophetess that what's going to happen is not going to be good for these people because they have gone far away from God and basically the idea of what exile will be, and he just wants to do everything he can to make things right before they get there. In chapter 34, verse 33, it says that Josiah took away all the abominations from all the territory that belonged to the people of Israel and made all who were present in Israel serve the Lord their God. All his days they did not turn away from following the Lord, the God of their fathers. So finally we have a good king who is trying to do the right things, trying to lead the people in the right ways, and because of what he's doing and because of the power of God that works in him, they're doing the right things and they're following in the right way. Josiah returned to the law. All of these other people before him had access to this same thing, but did not use it in the way that Josiah did. He returns to the ways of the law. And then in chapter 35, in verse 1, it says that Josiah kept a Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and they slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the first month. Now, kings who came before him would keep the Passover kind of on and off. There wasn't a consistency to it. It might not have been with the same reverence, but Josiah tries to bring it back to what it once was, remembering what God has done and delivering them, and remembering God's love for his people. Josiah celebrated the Passover. In every step along the way, it seems like Josiah is making the right choices. Now, I don't know if there are things of Josiah that we don't have recorded and Josiah's mistakes and all of that, but what we have emphasized for us here in 2 Chronicles is finally we have a king that's doing the right things. Finally, we have a king that's choosing the right ways and going in the right direction. But then also in chapter 35, he dies in battle. He is out in the midst of the battle, he finds himself wounded, and he dies. And then we find out what happens once that good leader is gone. Because it doesn't take very long before things start to look like the rest of Chronicles, where you have a lot more kings that are described in a different way. In chapter 36 and verse 1, it says, "The people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's place in Jerusalem. He was one who also did evil in the sight of the Lord." And then in verse 5, not too long after, it says, "Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign." The king of Egypt comes in and gets rid of one king and wants another one in his place. "And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did what was evil in the sight of God, of the Lord his God." And then in verse 9, it says, "Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord." And it's all come undone, hasn't it? In 11 and a half years, if you do the math of each of their reigns, in 10 days, I guess, everything comes undone. All of the reforms, all of the positive movement, everything's going in the right direction, and then suddenly they're right back to where they were before, if not worse. It's so easy, if we're not cautious, to listen to the wrong voices, to follow the wrong lead, and to end up in a place where we don't want to be. In Israel and Judah, they keep finding themselves in that same place over and over again, where they're in the wrong place, following the wrong people, ending up with the wrong results. So what does God do with all of that? And this is one of those places where, we look at the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, and sometimes we struggle with reconciling what feels like two different personalities. And I have to tell you that the God of the Old Testament is a pretty patient God. Because what I would do in this moment is be completely done with all of these people. Because all they do over and over again is listen to the wrong voices, move in the wrong direction, and yet what we find God doing sounds an awful lot like the God of the New Testament. He is not one who's willing to just write them off. He's going to do something different with them. In verse 15 of chapter 36, it says, "The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place." So first of all, God shows persistent compassion through his messengers. He sends prophet after prophet after prophet after prophet to try to lead the people back in the right direction, and they just don't listen. They just won't do the thing that they should do. And God tries to give them opportunity after opportunity to do the right thing, and they just won't listen. But he keeps persistently and lovingly and compassionately trying to reach out to them. And this is the God of both Testaments and the God of today. He is a God who desperately wants his people to be with him and reaches out and does everything that he can, and yet so often his people just don't listen, or the people around us just don't want to hear his message. In chapter 7, if we back up just a little bit in verse 14, we get this taken out of context all the time, but I think we can see what it's talking about here. It says that if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Doesn't this sound like what Josiah did as that king who begins so young and does all of these reforms and changes all of these things? When he sends out to find out from this prophetess what it is that God's going to do, and God reveals basically the plan of exile, Josiah wants to turn everything back toward God to the point that God is not going to let that happen to him. God's going to let him live and not go to exile, but then not long after him, they find themselves right back where they were again. God offers an opportunity to change and an opportunity for healing. And again, this is the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament and the God of today. He gives us an opportunity every day to change the things we need to change, to be different, to be more like him, to follow him better, and to heal the things that are broken in our lives. Then back in chapter 36, in verse 16, it says, "But they kept mocking the messengers of God." This could be a headline in the paper tomorrow, couldn't it? I mean, this is the world in which we live. They kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. They would not listen. And because they would not listen, the way it's described here in 2 Chronicles is, there was no remedy. And I don't know about you, but that is a difficult place to be. And I think we probably have experienced physically this within our lives and in the lives of the people that we love. There are things you want to fix physically that just can't be fixed. There are things you want to be different that just can't seem to be different. Spiritually, I don't believe we have ever been in this spot, even though we feel like we are sometimes. But these people are about to find exile within their world. There is no remedy for where they are because they won't listen. So there was exile that came. And one of the beautiful things that is done here toward the end of 2 Chronicles is everything about exile that we read all those different books about it during a Bible reading is kind of whittled down into about 6 or 7 verses of what exile was. And then on the other side of exile, you have something very different, because at the very end of the chapter, it's a very strange ending to the book, at least in my opinion. At the end of the chapter, we read about this King Cyrus, who's going to allow them to go back and to rebuild, and he makes this decree and talks about the followers of God, and then says at the end, "And let everyone go up," and then it's done. And you have this, again, because 2 Chronicles is kind of in the middle of your Old Testament, but if you were in the Jewish Bible and the way it has been put together over the years, it's the end of their Bible. It seems like kind of a strange ending, but that's because it's not an ending. The Old Testament was never intended to be the end of the story. There was something else that was going to come. And there are these hundreds of years of silence in between and different writings and things that happen, but God's story is not over at that point. God does not give up on his people. And even though they go off into exile, there's still at the very end there this little piece of hope that something else is coming. And for you and I, it's what we have been waiting for months in our Bible reading and on Sunday nights, to get to the good stuff. And not that the Old Testament is not good stuff, but it's something different when we finally get to where we're headed here in the Church of Christ. In Matthew chapter 1, in verse 18, it says that the birth of Jesus Christ took place this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being just a man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, one of those messengers that he sent that no one would listen to. Isaiah, in the 7th chapter of Isaiah, said this, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. And that's their struggle throughout the whole Old Testament, isn't it? God wants to be with them and is with them all the time, and they just try to keep their distance and try to move another direction. And God is not okay with that, to the point that after this time of hope at the end of the Old Testament, there comes a time where he is going to physically, literally be here with us. God came to be with us. And what seems so hopeless at the end of Chronicles is just setting up for what God is going to do in providing hope for his people, not just then, but for us a couple thousand years later too. God desired to be with us. Now, tonight, the Old Testament has a lot to say for us, and I think we see a lot of it in the life of Josiah. That we need to be people who are like him, that have a faith that is childlike at the beginning and grows into something greater. To be willing to look at the things that are wrong within our world and within our lives, and to break down those wrong things and to build back up something that is better. To be people who look and see the idols that are in our lives and are just willing to completely tear that down and burn it up and make it into dust so that we can replace that with the God who belongs in that spot. And most of all, to understand that this God that we serve, this God that we love and that we worship, is a God who is patient and compassionate and wants us to be with him so much that he comes here to be with us. Tonight, as we get into the New Testament and start moving in a different direction with our readings and with our Sunday evenings, it's a message of hope. It's a message that our lives can be changed and that we can follow him. If you have never followed him before, take the advice of an 8-year-old and do what's right. Move in the direction that he wants you to go and follow him and stand firm in that. Or if you have found yourself like so many of those kings, if you're really going to admit it, being honest with yourself, doing what's evil in the sight of the Lord, know that he can change you. Know that he has the patience and the compassion to want to change you and to make you better. And if there's some way we can help you with any of that as your church family, please come while we stand and sing.